What's going on, YouTube? Welcome back to another video, and today I have an update on the branded Chimera list. I've been cooking this deck since my last video, so it's been a minute, and I've been working on it a lot. I'm just going to go ahead and just get straight on into it, because I actually wrote a script, kind of, for the video. So I should be able to get through this a little bit quicker. And starting us off with the Chimera portion of the deck, we got 3 copies of Gazelle, the King of Mythical Claws, who on normal or special can add a level 5 Fiend or Chimera Fusion from your deck to your hand, as well as when he's used as fusion material, you can add a illusion monster from your deck to your hand. Super solid effects. Both are once per turn, unfortunately, but it's understandable. Modern day, if you could just loop this thing as a fusion material over and over again, it would be kind of broken. Then we have 2 copies of Big Winged Baphomet, the level 5 fiend that you were typically searching out. I have thought about looking into other level 5 fiends that are searchable off of the normal summon effect that might be decent techs, but I didn't find the time to do that. Anyways, Baphomet on normal or special summon adds both a beast, a level 4 beast monster, and or Chimera Fusion from the deck, so you can either add both a level 4 beast or Chimera Fusion, or you can add one or the other from your deck to your hand. This would be interesting to see with a Tri-Brigade engine, but as far as I'm aware, I don't think the 2 archetypes mix that well. I could try it if people would be interested in that. But regardless, Baphomet is typically never really being normal summoned. You're only ever special summoning him, and the way you're doing that is with your 1-card combo starter, which is a 3 of Mirror Sword Knight, who has the illusion clause, and I'm going to clear up the illusion clause just so I don't have to read over it every time. Basically, when this card battles, neither monster can be destroyed by that battle. That is essentially the illusion clause, so if a monster has it, I'm just going to call illusion clause, go over the effect. Mirror Sword Knight has a quick effect during the main phase, where he can tribute himself in order to summon a monster that mentions Chimera Fusion from the deck, i.e. Baphomet or Gazelle, but he can also summon other monsters that include Chimera Fusion, excluding himself. And while you control Chimera, the flying mythical beast, i.e. the fusion monster, you can banish him from the graveyard to negate a monster effect that your opponent ends up activating. Then I'm on 2 copies of Cornfield Codal. You could be playing this at 3. I'm opting for 2 because the amount of ways to see the Chimera engine are extremely high. There's even a built-in way with the branded portion of the deck where you can get into the Chimera part of the deck while still playing the game and putting up interactions. Codal has an effect where you can discard it from your hand to add a monster that mentions Chimera Fusion on it from your deck to your hand. And then while you control Chimera, the flying mythical beast, you can banish it from your graveyard to negate an effect that targets a card you control. Both of these can have Chimera. I believe both of these need Chimera on the board in order to activate those effects. Codal also has the illusion clause, being an illusion. Every illusion monster is going to have the illusion clause. I think I should just clear that up before continuing on. And then I'm also on a 1 of Nightmare Apprentice. Nightmare Apprentice could easily be slotted out for the 3rd Cornfield Codal. I just feel like Codal is a little cloggy at 3, and Nightmare Apprentice at 3 is just worse than 3 Codal. But I went for the 2-1 split because you have ways to recur both monsters multiple times. So let's go over what Apprentice does. Obviously, she's an illusion, so illusion clause. On normal or special summon, she adds an illusion monster from your deck to your hand. And she can also you can also special summon her from your hand by discarding one card. That's really all there is to that. And then we have 2 copies of Chimera Fusion. You could also play a third Chimera Fusion if you wanted to. I'm opting for 2 because you really only need the 2. Because this card is during the main phase. You can fusion summon a fusion monster from your extra deck as long as you use a beast or a fiend monster. And then while it's in the graveyard and you have Chimera, the flying mythical beast, on your field or in your graveyard, you can activate one of 2 effects where you can either add it from your graveyard back to your hand, or you can banish it to summon the original Baphomet and Gazelle from your deck, which we're not playing OG Gazelle and Baphomet because those cards are like 20 years old and they're not that good. So, that effect never comes up. And this card is not a once per turn on the fusion summon, but the effect to add from graveyard to hand is a hard once per turn. And that is it for the Chimera cards in the main deck. And I know Nightmare Apprentice isn't directly a Chimera card, but it searches out your Chimera engine fairly easily. I gotta fix the way my camera is sitting a little bit. I meant to fully center, or at least center as well as I could before starting the video. Now we're going to get into the branded portion of the deck, which would be starting us off with 2 copies of Fallen of Albaz. And Fallen of Albaz on normal or special can discard a card to fusion summon using monsters from both sides of the field, but you have to use this card as one of the materials, and then you're not allowed to use any other cards from your side of the field as material. So he's basically a super poly on legs that can be responded to, and that's really all you gotta worry about. That's all he does. You're only ever using this as fusion material with branded fusion, and I haven't had the normal summon effect ever come up. So yeah. Then we have 1 copy of Allure, the Jester of Despia, who on normal or special can add a branded spell trap from your deck to your hand. And then while he's in the graveyard, if a fusion monster you control is destroyed, you can target an effect monster your opponent controls, special summon Allure, and then negate that targeted monster's effects. Whereas, and then you can only use one of his 2 effects in a turn. So you can use his effect to search on your turn, and then he becomes a negate while in the graveyard. So yeah, and then new addition to the couple of new additions to the list from last time. We have 1 copy of Springen's Kit. Springen's Kit has the effect that if you control a fusion monster that mentions Fallen of Albaz, you can special summon it from the hand on normal or special. She can add a branded spell or trap from the deck from your graveyard, banish, or deck to your hand, and then you place a card from your hand on the bottom of the deck. And I believe that's her only effect. Yeah, that's all you gotta know. It is once per turn, but we only play 1 of her because you really only need the 1 of her. And then we also play 1 copy of Albion, the Shrouded Dragon, which this card in testing is probably one of the best cards in the entire deck, just for the amount of utility and the different fusions you can make off of it. So Albion is treated as Albaz while he's on the field or in the graveyard, and then while he's in your hand or in your graveyard, you can send a branded spell or trap from your hand or deck to the graveyard and apply one of 2 effects. If you sent the branded spell trap from your hand to the graveyard, you special summon him either from your hand or from your graveyard. Or if you sent it from your deck, you place him on the bottom of your deck and draw a card. This card has so much utility, being a level 8 dragon, a level 8 dark dragon. Let's see, level 8 dark dragon with 2500 attack. That is mostly important for the extra deck because of some of the fusions that I have opted to run, mostly because I don't have some of the other branded cards, which is why I'm also playing branded Chimera instead of just playing pure branded. Now we move on to the branded spells and traps. Starting us off, we have 3 copies of Branded Opening. Branded Opening is a quick play spell that, when you activate it, you can discard a card in order to either add to your hand or special summon from your deck in defense position a Despia monster, i.e. a Luber. You never want to draw a Luber, which is why this deck is more than 40 cards. It's to help mitigate the amount of times you see a Luber, but it also isn't so far above 40 that it's just inconsistent and has, blatant, consistency issues. I've been testing this deck constantly to get the consistency to feel correct, and I believe this list is the most correct I can get it. So there we go. Branded Opening also has another effect where if a fusion monster or monster you control would be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can banish it from the graveyard instead. Similar to Return of the Dragon Lords, but once per turn. Both of those are once per turn effects as well. And then we have the one of Branded Fusion. Everybody knows what Branded Fusion does. But if you don't know what Branded Fusion does because you've never played Branded or you just don't have an interest in Branded, I don't know why, if you don't have an interest in Branded, you'd be watching this unless you have an interest in Chimera Branded or Branded Chimera, however you want to pronounce the deck. Branded Fusion can use materials from your hand, field, or deck, but all the materials used, which you can only use 2, have to be from the same location. That is important because if you have an Albaz, or if you open with both copies of Albaz, very unlikely, then both of your fusion materials have to be from hand because you have to use Albaz as one of the materials because it can only fusion summon monsters that use Fallen of Albaz as material by sending them from the deck to the graveyard, and then it fusion locks you. Branded Opening also fusion locks you. I believe a Luber has a fusion lock on him, but our entire extra deck is fusion monsters. Spoiler alert, our whole extra deck is purple, so, there's that. And then we have the 1 copy of Branded Lost. I have thought about playing more copies of Branded Lost just because of how good it is, and with more slots open because of the loss of Branded Fusion to 1. The idea of playing 2 or possibly even 3 Branded Lost has come up in my mind, and the reason why is because Branded Lost prevents your opponent from negating and responding to effects that involve fusion summoning, i.e. spell cards and some of the extra deck monsters as well. And then, when you fusion summon, you can add a monster from your deck to your hand that mentions Fallen of Albaz in its text. So, Springin's Kit, because it says if you control a fusion monster that mentions Fallen of Albaz. Or Albion, because he says it's treated as Fallen of Albaz. This card is insane, and I'm still only playing it at 1 because if you open the Branded Fusion, searching this, if your opponent lets the Aluber resolve, it is just free advantage, and it also insulates you against Ash Blossom. Then we have 1 copy of Branded Retribution, which Kit and Retribution are our 2nd and 3rd copies of Branded Fusion. And the reason why is because Retribution, although an Omni negate by either bouncing a fusion you control back into the extra deck, or if you have 2 fusion monsters that mention Fallen of Albaz in your graveyard, you return one of those to the extra deck to negate an effect that involves summoning. It can banish itself from the graveyard to add a branded spell or trap from your graveyard back to the hand. So that's the effect we care for the most. But Retribution having that negation effect means it's not a hard garnet. It's just harder to utilize rather than just simply, like the other cards being able to just fully play them out. And Albion being able to send any branded spell or trap from the deck to the graveyard means once you use 1 Branded Opening, the other ones are just free foolish targets off of Albion, or if you draw into another copy of it, Albion becomes a free 2500 body that you can put on the board to help push for game. And that is it for the branded package. It is a very small package in the deck, and it's consistent of mostly one-offs. But that's just because that's how I built this deck. I built this deck more to play Chimera with a good backbone to help back it up. And that's why the branded package is so small. Because originally, I wasn't even playing Albion, and I wasn't playing Kit. It was just the 2 Albaz, a Luber, 3 Opening, 3 Fusion. But now, actually playing Albion, God, that card is cracked. And now we're going to move on to the generic cards, which is the generic card section. Is going to be very swift. We have 2 copies of Polymerization because, there's a certain card in the extra deck that if this is in the graveyard, it can't be targeted. But that effect doesn't even really matter because, whatever. I'm not too worried about it. And Poly is a good way to get us into our fusion monsters and start some of our plays, because we can use it to fusion summon using a Gazelle in our hand and whatever else, as long as we meet proper fusion requirements. And then Gazelle can get us into Mirror Sword Knight, which can then get us into Baphomet, and continue our plays from there. Then I'm also on 3 copies of Crossout Designator, because there are a lot of hand traps that I am playing that also really hurt the deck just outright. And being able to stop those hand traps is very important to me, which is why I'm also on 1 copy of Called by the Grave. I know you'll probably call me insane for playing 3 Crossout, 1 Called by to stop hand traps, but with this deck's inherent super weakness to Ash Blossom, Effect Veiler, the whole 9 yards, having ways to stop those hand traps, especially Infinite Impermanence, is very important to me, which is why I am playing these cards as the generic spells without any generic traps. And then we move on to the hand traps. As I said, I am on quite a few hand traps here. Starting us off, we have 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, because, mainstay in the game. You can't really play a deck without playing Ash unless the meta is Snake Eyes and you don't want Hida to steal your Ash from the graveyard. But you still have to play Ash regardless. Then I'm on 3 copies of Effect Veiler. This is both of these are hand traps that do hurt our deck. If our opponent Ashes or Veilers our Baphomet, that really hurts because we just lose out on a bunch of card advantage. Ashing the Branded Fusion, also very painful. There's a lot of things in here that these 2 cards specifically really hurt. And then I'm also on 2 copies of Bestial Druis Worm and 1 copy of Bestial Magnamut. Both of these are dual purpose. Obviously anti-Fiendsmith, but not only that, Magnamut can search out either Druis Worm or it can search out Albaz or Albion, because they're both dragons, which is very important. And it's a 2500 body, which is also important for a fusion monster that I'm going to bring up when we go to the extra deck. Druis Worm serves the double purpose of, if it's used as a fusion material, or not used as a fusion material, but if it leaves the field by any means, it sends a special summon monster your opponent controls to the graveyard, which is very good because you can use Druis Worm on the field and 2 materials in hand for a certain fusion monster that requires 3 materials, and still get rid of 2 cards your opponent controls, while also drawing 2 cards. I'm pretty sure people already know which fusion monster I am talking about. And then I'm also on 1 copy of Nibiru the Primal Being, just mainly as a cross-out target, but when we get to the side deck, you'll see that this deck has mostly a side deck geared for going second, but you can still go second in this deck just fine. And then lastly, we're on 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence, which is just 3 more copies of Effect Veiler that can't be cross-outed, or that can't be called by. Sorry. Valor is able to be called by Imperm. It has to be cross-outed. Same thing with the Bystials. And if you have to cross out any of these cards, it's not a big deal. Most of our interaction comes out of the extra deck, and it's also on field and in graveyard. The only interaction that does get hurt by, like, specifically the Bystials is Mirror Sword Knight, because it is a light monster, but it banishes its cost. So if our opponent doesn't banish the Mirror Sword Knight before trying to commit to any of their plays, then yeah, that just kind of makes it free. And that is it for the main deck. I believe this is either a 42 or a 43 card main deck. I'm not 100% certain on that one, if I fully remember. Then moving on to the extra deck, we have 2 copies of Chimera, the King of Phantom Beasts. I will preface this. All of the Chimera-based fusion monsters treat themselves as Chimera the Flying Mythical Beast, or as I wrote down in my notes, OG Chimera. That is important because the effects of Mirror Sword Knight and Codal in the graveyard to banish themselves to negate effects requires OG Chimera. So that's why I'm also not playing OG Gazelle and Baphomet, because I don't want to play a Garnet, or I don't want to play 2 Garnets that you would rather summon out of the deck. And I don't want to take up an extra deck slot with OG Chimera, because OG Chimera is kind of bad. I will continue on with the effects now. So, this Chimera on Fusion Summon can force your opponent during the end phase of the turn to discard a card. Wow, you can rip a card out of your opponent's hand. And if they already had to discard some hand traps, that means less options for them to discard. And this is typically one of the earliest summons you're doing. It also has a graveyard effect where during your opponent's turn specifically, it can banish itself to summon a beast, fiend, or illusion monster from your graveyard back to your side of the field, which could implicate, if you have access to the Fiendsmith engine, I would play that over the branded engine and fill out the extra deck with, the Fiendsmith related cards. I don't have $500 to blow on the Fiendsmith engine, so I don't play that. If you have the Fiendsmith engine, that's on you, and you can continue to play that. One card in the extra deck I've thought about cutting, after cutting out cards like Master Tau, is the one of Baphomet, but Baphomet's graveyard effect does come up. On Fusion Summon, he foolishes a beast, fiend, or illusion from the deck to the graveyard, and then on your opponent's turn can banish himself to summon a banished beast, fiend, or illusion, which is very important. That can actually come up because you can summon back your Chimera. You can summon back this Chimera after it banishes itself to Reborn from the graveyard. He's also a pretty big attack position body, being 2400, as opposed to the 2100 of Chimera, the King of Mythical Beasts. This Chimera. This Chimera is only 21. And then for the big dog of the Chimera fusions, the one card that I believe should have been printed at higher than super rare, but as super rare means it's affordable, is the one copy of Chimera the Illusion Beast. This card goes hard. It's an illusion, so it has the illusion clause. Its fusion requirements. Okay, so let me go over the fusion requirements super quick. Chimera requires a beast and a fiend. Baphomet requires 2 monsters with different types between beast, fiend, and illusion, so you can use any combination of those 3 card types. This guy requires Chimera the Flying Mythical Beast, or, any of these fusion monsters, is still treated as that, so if you wanted to play a second one, you could use another copy of him for his own summon, but you only need 1. Requires the fusion monster plus 1 or more illusion monsters. Can attack monsters for each material used for a summon, and that includes the first 2 initial ones that you have to use. So by default, he's attacking twice, and he's 3100 with the illusion clause, and he has this awesome little line of text that says if he doesn't destroy a monster by battle, you can reduce that monster's attack to 0, and he doesn't have to attack different monsters. He can attack the same monster multiple times in a row. At 3100, this card by itself is able to push for lethal damage because of how big it is. Then we're getting into the honorary Chimera card because it has Chimera in the name, and that's 2 copies of Guardian Chimera, who requires 3 monsters with different names to be fusion summoned, but you have to use at least 1 from your hand and 1 from your field. So that means you're either using 2 from field and 1 from hand, or vice versa. And on fusion summon, he can destroy cards on the field equal to the number of field materials used, and draw cards equal to the number of hand materials used. And then if polymerization is in the graveyard, he can't be targeted. Both effects are once per turn, but the on summon effect is a once per turn, but it's still a really good card, and and you can also chain block this so it can't be ashed, because if your opponent ashes this, you don't get to pop 2 cards because it has an effect to draw, and so on and so forth. And now we move on past this into the rest of the extra deck, which is almost exclusively for the branded portion of the deck, starting with 2 copies of Mirror Jade, the Iceblade Dragon. Mirror Jade is nuts. Everybody knows Mirror Jade is nuts. Has a quick effect to send a fusion monster that mentions Fallen of Albaz from the extra deck to the graveyard in order to banish a card on the field, and then if it dies, if your opponent removes this during the end phase, you nuke their board. If you use that quick effect, though, you can't use it on the turn after it was used. So if you use it on your opponent's turn, you can't use it again on your turn. And that during the end phase, destroy all monsters your opponent controls is just... when this card got announced, I was like, oh, it's just a slower Absolute Zero from Heroes. But obviously this deck is much better than Heroes because Mirror Jade actually has a form of interaction on it that isn't just Absolute Zero nuking your opponent's board. And then for the one-off fusion monsters for the branded portion of the deck, we have 1 copy of Albalenitus because he's a really good monster to be making if your opponent is on 10 pi and you force them to go first, because you can go normal summon Albaz, use their entire dragon board, make this. You can attack monsters up to the number of materials used, and then during the end phase, if it's in the graveyard because it was sent there that turn, catch my breath super quick, you can add 1 fusion or polymerization normal spell from your deck to your hand. It's in there as a target to send off a Mirror Jade, but it's good in the 10 pi matchup as well. So there's that. Then we're on the 1 copy of Lubellion, who on summon, you can discard a card to fusion summon a monster to fusion summon a level 8 or lower fusion monster from your extra deck, using materials from your field, graveyard, or that are banished, and shuffling them back into the deck or extra deck. And then then he can't attack or something like that, and I believe you get fusion locked. The only effect that matters is the on summon fusion summon, and that's really his only effect because everything else is just like a lock, or it's him not being able to attack. So it's not important, or it's not the most important text in the world. Then for tech pieces, these are cards that you don't really need to be running, but in this list I would highly recommend is 1 copy of Rindbrum, the Striking Dragon, because Rindbrum, his fusion materials are obviously Fallen of Albaz, but a beast warrior, or winged beast monster. One of our cards for Chimera is a beast monster that searches the 1 card starter in Gazelle. So you can go branded fusion, send Albaz and Gazelle to then, on resolution, search out Mirror Sword Knight, which then allows you to normal summon the Mirror Sword Knight and go through your Chimera combo. So this card is really good. But not only that, he is a negate for extra deck base monsters. So if your opponent activates a Fusion, Xyz, or Link monster's effect, you can negate it and then non-targeting bounce a monster on either side of the field to the hand. This card is really good. And if you don't have a hand that allows you to go through the natural combo of being able to make Mirror Jade without losing too much hand advantage, this isn't a bad option to make, because it also gets you into your other engine. Then I'm also on one copy of Titaniclad. This is why I've talked about Albion being such a good flex spot in the deck, because you can use Albion to send himself and Albaz from the deck to the graveyard to not only make Lubellion, but you can also use him to make Albalenitis and Titaniclad, which requires a monster with 2500 or more attack, and on summon gains attack equal to the combined levels of both materials used for the fusion summon times 100. So if you use Albaz and Albion, this card gains 1200 attack and it comes down as almost a 4000 attack point monster. And then if it was in the graveyard because it was sent there this turn, you can either add to your hand or special summon from your deck Fallen of Albaz or a Dogmatica monster. Crazy. These cards are kind of nuts. And then I'm also on one copy of Albion, the Branded Dragon, because of the when sent to graveyard effect. But if he's summoned, you can fusion summon by banishing materials from your hand, field, or graveyard for a level 8 or lower fusion monster. His fusion requirements are a Fallen of Albaz and a light monster. No, Lubellion is a light monster. Albion is a dark monster. Sorry. Or no, I'm right. Yeah, no. Okay, Lubellion is the dark monster. My bad. They're flip-flopped. It's confusing, especially when I'm trying to get through this now that we're over half an hour into this. But Albion, if he was in the graveyard because he was sent there that turn, can set a branded spell or trap from the deck. That one you can't ash. Albalenitis, Titaniclad, you can't ash. Oh, let's backtrack to Rinbrum super quick. So if Rinbrum is in the graveyard, you can target a Fallen of Albaz that's in your graveyard and either special summon Rinbrum or that Fallen of Albaz, and then you banish the other target. So if let's say you properly fusion summon the Rinbrum, your opponent outs it, and you have Fallen of Albaz still in your graveyard, you can either summon the Rinbrum back by banishing the Fallen of Albaz, or you can summon back the Albaz as a way to super poly on your opponent's turn. You can do this during the battle phase of Tenpai in order to fusion summon into something like Albalenitis and other things. And then for the generic fusions, we're on one copy of Pertaplant Dragostapelia because it's a monster negation, and one copy of Garura because it's a winged beast that you can use from your field in order to make Rinbrum with polymerization, but it's also just a really good card to send to the graveyard with a card that's in our side deck. It's also a good super poly target, but I cut super poly and I don't regret it at all because it was not that good of a card in our side deck. So moving onward to said side deck, we're starting it off with a card that you can also slot out for other options, being one copy of Diabelle's The Original Sin Keeper. Now, why is this here? Why is this in my side deck? And what does it do? Well, it's here specifically for Snake Eye. If a Sinful Spoils card is in either graveyard, then you can special summon it from your hand for free. It's an illusion, so it has the illusion clause. Your opponent is forced to set spells and traps before they're able to be activated, and then when your opponent sets a card, you can target a card you control and a card your opponent controls and destroy both. That's why she's in here. She gives you like extra interaction, and she forces your opponent to play less optimally by forcing them into setting cards. And if your opponent has quick play spells, obviously they set them and then they can't activate them, which is really good against Runic. Being an illusion, one effect I did forget to go over, which I will go over right now, is for Big Winged Baphomet. If he's used as fusion material, he can target an illusion in the graveyard and special summon it to your field. So if you have this in the graveyard along with and then you put Berfomet in the graveyard for fusion material, you can just summon this back out. It's a 2500 body. You can replace this with anything though. You don't have to play this. This is my one of my copium side deck options. I was main decking it and it just kind of felt bad main decking it, but it gave me another card to search off of Nightmare Apprentice. Then another card I'm playing is 3 copies of DD Crow. If you do come up to the matchup with Fiendsmith Snake Eye or Fiendsmith Ubel or Fiendsmith whatever, and you don't open with the Bestials, DD Crow is 3 more copies of Bestials, but worse. So it's not a bad card to be playing currently into the metagame. And then I'm also on 3 copies of Droll and Lockbird, because this is another card that we do lose to. We search a ton. Like, there's a lot of searching, so if our opponents are on Droll, we can always just board a single copy of this in and use it as a cross-out target. Or we can board all 3 of it in if our opponent is on a deck that also hyper searches. So I'm kind of coping on these as well, but there's another card that I'm coping on in the side deck, which is not these remaining 2 copies of the Biru. You can slot in these 2 copies of the Biru for whatever. And then one card that I am coping on that I have like a full-on replacement for in mind is 3 copies of Ultimate Slayer. Ultimate Slayer is an interesting one because your opponent can't respond to it with monster effects, and then you can send a monster from your extra deck to the graveyard with a matching extra deck type from Fusion Xyz, Link, and Synchro to shuffle a card your opponent controls of the same type back into the extra deck, which I know immediately is kind of weird to be playing this as a side option, but into Fiendsmith boards, you can Ultimate Slayer, send Garura, shuffle away the Desiree, and they can't respond with Desiree unless they chain like a back row card. And that forces the Desiree anyways. And then last we were on 3 copies of Dimensional Barrier. So Slayer I would replace with Forbidden Droplet, or maybe even evenly matched. Barrier is again dual purpose. It's really good into the Tenpai matchup. It's really good into the Ubel matchup. It's really good. It's decent into the Fiendsmith matchup, but it's also there as a cross-out target if we need it. So I'm going to pause the recording here, and then I'll come back for the outro. And here we are at the end of the almost 40-minute long deck profile. I tried to get this to not be 40 minutes. I did kind of ramble, but most of my rambling was card effects and the uses of the cards. So I hope that's okay. And like I said, if you guys want me to test out a Chimera Tri-Brigade list, I can definitely do that. I have other decks that I can rework as well because of the ban list. Pot of Prosperity being limited, I have a lot of decks on the channel that use 3 Prosperity, so I can always go through and rework those. And with that, I will see everybody in the next video. Hopefully that won't take 3 weeks, but no promises. Peace.